Hello and welcome to Volume 2 of our Angular 7 series. In today's tutorial, we're going to be talking about Angular Authentication. To start with, I'm going to go to my IDE, the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open the project. And to open a project, you just need to go to the menu, File, Open Folder. Make sure you select Open Folder, and then I'm going to select the user folder, which contains the user project that we worked on in volume 1 of our tutorials. Then click select folder, and this opens up the Angular 7 project known as user. And once this happens, I'm going to close this welcome screen. We have a terminal over here. In the terminal, I'm going to start the application. I'm going to do ng, if you recall, ng serve open. And while that's opening up, I'm going to open the README file just to show you. So we're going to be trying to create a project structure like this. And to do this, we're going to do generate statements. And on those generate statements, we're going to end up with a structure that looks like this, where there's app, page, and pages are going to be the login pages, which for now are going to be the sign-in pages. Eventually, we're going to have the registration pages over here, which we'll call sign up. But for now, we have the login, sign in. For user, we only have list user. Eventually, we're going to have add user and other pages. But for now, that's what we're going to have. And then we're going to have a utility folder, which will contain the auth guard. This auth guard we're going to use to protect the list user component that we're going to build today. And of course, by protecting it, it'll force you to go to the sign in page, which is the page we're building today. So the structure is going to look like that. To generate the pages, on the Visual Studio Code menu, I'm going to do a new terminal. You can have as many terminals as you want over here in Visual Studio Code, which is the reason why we recommend this IDE, as it works very well with Angular. Okay, so I'm going to come over here, do CLS. I'm on Windows, so CLS means clear the screen. I don't want this stuff over here when the terminal comes up. And then we're just going to generate the 3 components. To generate the components, I'm going to be using the following commands. ng, which means Angular, generate component, and I'm going to put it into a folder called page, subfolder called login, and the component itself is called sign in. I'm going to do spec false. And what this does is to guarantee that we only generate 2 files. One of them a TypeScript file, this one right here, sign in component TS, and then a sign in HTML component. I don't want to generate test classes or CSS, and the reason why I don't want to generate CSS is because we're going to be using only one CSS file, this one right here. We're going to be using this one only. So when we do generation, we don't want to generate anything else other than HTML and the TypeScript file. So that's why we're doing that. And finally, I'm going to say module app, and this is going to generate my login sign in component for me. Okay, that's done. I'm going to do just a little CLS again to clear screen. I like having my screen blank. And I'm going to generate the second component. I'm just going to do the up arrow key on my shell, but this is going to go to the user subfolder, and I'm going to call it list user. So this is basically how to generate components using Angular CLI. So I'm going to do CLS to clear screen again. One last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to do up arrow key again. I'm still going to leave this ng generate. This time around though, I'm not generating a component. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to generate a guard like that. And I'm not going to put it in pages. I'm going to create a subfolder. I'm going to call this auth. I'm still going to make sure that I generate only the guard file and put it in the module app. The reason why we do this module app is because in Angular, you can have as many modules as you want just for organizing your project. But in this case, and for the sake of these tutorials, we're just going to be using one main module, this one called app. That's why we're doing that. Let's go ahead and generate that. Okay, and we're done with the first part of our tutorial, generating components. Now, let's go and look at our project. First, let's go to the other terminal. To change terminals, you just click on here. See, you have 2 of them. I'm going to go to Node. By the way, Angular runs using Node.js, which is the reason why in tutorial 1, you remember we had to check the Node.js version, but that's why that's saying Node. So when I go to Node, you can switch through the modules like that. So that's the module, the terminal we're using to generate components, and this is the terminal we're using to run the application. As you can see, it's running. If you see any errors, they appear over here in red, then you need to fix them. Otherwise, it seems like we don't have any errors. Let's go to our browser now and see what's going on. So on the browser, we have this, which is from our tutorial 1. Now we're going to comment out this so we can get started. Okay, so to comment that out, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open this file right here, app component. The reason why we have those things on the page is because we have this code. If I comment this out, I'm still going to be left with my toolbar over here that we built in tutorial volume 1 and this outlet. This router outlet is very critical. That's the routing. I'll show you how that works. Let's go back to the Chrome browser. Once this happens, I'm going to do F12, which is going to invoke the Chrome developer tools. You can also go to the menu right here, do menu, more tools, and click on developer tools. But F12 on your keyboard should bring this up. We're going to be using the console, but there's a lot of other things. You can do source, you can do network, and it will tell you all the calls that have been made. But we're going to be using the console tab. And when you're here, just make sure you don't have any red. If you have red, that means that you have errors. If you have yellow, that means that you have warnings, which you should need to fix. When there's nothing, if you need to clear, all you do is just to click on this. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code and open this file. App routing module is under source app. This is what determines your routing. If you don't have it, you can generate a module. The reason why the application is going to the app component HTML right here is because we don't have any routes. You see that array right there? It's empty. So now we're going to start by putting our own routes there. We're going to create 3 routes. On the first one, I'm going to do path, sign in component, sign in component. I'm going to do another path, just a blank path. If a user comes in and they don't type in anything like we're going to do, when we first come to the application, we're not going to supply any path because we don't know the paths at that point. Then it's just gonna redirect us to list user path match full. And the third path we're gonna do is, as you can see, when you want to define a path, all you do is say path. Once you do that, you gotta do a comma and tell it when we call that path what component it's gonna call. And in this case, it's gonna be list user component. And every time I do that, you notice it's got suggestions for me. I say enter. And when I do, this is what's happening. It's importing actually those components from where they are, which is where we defined in the page login. Remember when we're generating the component. So we have 3 paths. Now let's go back to the application and see what's happening. Now it says list user works because we defined paths and we said that if we provide an empty, we're going to go to list user. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code and look again. So it came into the application and it went to that blank and then it redirected to list user. And what is list user? Is under user list user. It's this component over here which says list user works, and that's the reason why it's showing it up like that. So let's try to put something there instead of it saying list user works. So the first thing I'm going to do is when I build a page, I start with a component. So we're going to come to the component. First of all, this implements ng on init. We're not going to use that. During scaffolding, this code is generated automatically. If you don't need it, we're just going to delete on init again over here. We don't use that interface for now. And instead of this, we're going to do a method here called logout. So the errors are gone. So all that logout is going to do is I'm going to say local storage remove item, and this item I'm going to call it access token. So every time we log out, we're just going to remove that, and that's very important. And for handling errors, I'm going to say something here, error message of type any. It's going to be a string, but I'll just say type any, and I'll say, and over here in the constructor, I'm going to say private router. I'm going to define a router of type Angular routing, that type. Again, that is imported from Angular router. It's called router. And in the logout, so we're going to remove that token. Once we remove it, then we're going to say this router, which we just defined, navigate. And when you do navigation, you just have to do that array, and then you say sign in. So remove the access token. and then go to the sign-in page. Now let's build the list user HTML. First thing I'm going to do here is to create, I'm just going to comment this stuff out, and I'll say mat card. And what is this? Mat card is actually a Angular material component, and to use it I'm going to come over here to the app material module that we created in tutorial 1, and I need to import it into this class and then export it to the application so I can use it in the list user. And to do that, if you recall from volume 1 of tutorials, you just do mat card module and you import it in here. You must export it to the application like that, and now we can use it over here. So that's what mat card is. And then we start building this. Now mat card has 3 subcomponents, and if you don't know, let me just show you. Mat card title, and then we have another one called mat card footer. And you want to see documentation on this. First of all, let's go back to the application in Chrome. We'll look at it, make sure there's no errors here when it compiles. Otherwise, you need to fix those errors. Usually the errors are related to components that you import that Angular doesn't know. As you can see, there's no errors, and there's this thing here. Right now you don't know what it is, but this is the card. If you don't know anything about these components, if you want to check the documentation, go Google Angular material design and come to the there's the guides. Come over here and you can find whatever we're doing here. So like if you go to card, you'll see that this is a card. That's a simple card. That's how to do it. And I'm using currently the title, and I'm not using anything else other than the footer. So that's what I'm doing. So you can reference that document if you want. So let's go back and continue. So in here we have a title and a footer. First thing, inside the title, I'm going to do a div, just a normal div. I'll say class title header, like that. And I'll say user list. Okay. This is a CSS class that I want to go now and define. To define the CSS classes, again, you go to the source styles, and to define a class, you just do that. Font size 19 pixels. Color 3FB, F5, 1B. That's what we're going to do, which is that blue right there. And that's good. So it's just some blue. So in the footer, we're going to have a little bit more code. We're going to have a button. Mat raised button. When you do this, you're invoking Angular material again. So that's a button. I'm going to come over here again, do mat button module. I need to do that, otherwise I get into trouble. So mat raised button, color, accent, on click. I want to call this method right here. See that? That's what I want to call there. And you click that button, and I'm going to say mat icon. And mat icon again is the Angular material design component. So you need to come here and say mat icon module. And then I'll come back in here and I'll just say to use these icons, I'm going to show you where I'm getting it. You just go to the browser and do Google again Angular material, icons, and you'll see them. I'm using this one particularly right here called Power Settings, and if you want to see it, all you do is click on it, and you click on this, and you can just copy this like that. So if you do that, copy that, and then I'm going to come back to my Visual Studio Code, and I'll just put that there like that. That's all I'm doing. And I'm going to say the button name is logout. So let's go back to our page now and see what's going on. I'm going to go to Chrome. We're going to go back to our application right now, and you can see it looks like that. Now, what I want to do is move this to the center, and to do that, and then move this all the way to the right, but it needs to say logout right here. So let's go back to the code, and I'm going to say, so I want to save this, and I want to move this to the center. To move it to the center, all you do is on the mod card title, I'm going to say align center, and on the bottom here on the footer, I'm going to say align right. Okay, let's go back and see what happens now. So as you can see, our button has the logout, and it's on the right, and it's got a nice little icon there. Now let's log out of here. So this is a page is completed. Now we're gonna log out of here and see what happens. When I log out, see now it tells me sign in works. So now let's go build and sign in. Let's go and build the sign in page. To do that, I'm gonna go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm gonna close all these bad boys, and I'll close all these screens and go back to now our login screen, which we're gonna do sign in component. As usual, we start with the component, and to build the component, again, I'm not gonna need this on init interface right here. I'm just gonna delete that. This button right here, you click on that, it just leaves the screen so that I have more space to work with. That's all I want to do. So I'm going to come in here and now build this class. First, I'm going to define that error message like we did for the other class, any, and I'm going to say login form of type form group. Okay, now when you do this, this is very important. Form group comes from Angular Forms, and your application is not going to know what this is unless you go over here. I'm going to expand this, and you need, as soon as you do that, you need to come to your module, whatever module it's in. In this case, we're using only one module, and you need to import, not here, but in the import section here, you need to do this and say reactive forms module, like that. This comes from Angular Forms. You need to have that, otherwise your application gets confused what you're doing over here. I'm just saying this form is of type Angular reactive form. And then we go to the constructor right here, and I have two things now. I'm going to say private form builder, again, that is from Angular Forms. You see it's been imported there. I'm going to do a comma here. Again, I'm going to do router from the Angular routing, like that. So it comes from the Angular router. And in case it doesn't import this, or you don't have time to wait, you just click on it and you do control period, and it will tell you where it's coming from. But right now, since we already imported it from Angular router, it's got that. So there we go. Like, this is what I mean. So if I delete this like that, it won't know what router is. So now I can just click on this. When you see this red squiggly line, you just click on it and you do control period, and there'll be several suggestions. Using your up and down buttons, you go to the correct one, which is that one, and you enter. When you enter, again, it's just gonna import this statement like that. That's a little trick for Visual Studio Code, just for the future. So the first thing I'm going to do with this method, I'm going to call it build login form. Okay, and I'm going to come back to the constructor right here, and all I'm going to do in the constructor is to say this dot. When you define methods in here, you need to say this, and I'm going to say build login form like that. So meaning when you're creating or when you're constructing this class, call that method first. And what that's going to do is to build the form that we're talking about. And I'm going to say this dot login form is equals to, and by the way, this is how to build Angular reactive forms. So just do this dot form builder dot group. That's all you have to do to build an Angular form, reactive form. And inside here, you need to provide an array. That's why it's complaining. And then you just say username, and this is going to be like that. And then you say password. Same thing. It's going to be like that. So we're saying that we're going to have two fields there. One of them is called username. The other one is called password. Now, to define these, what I'm going to do is, and watch this, and this is how you do these things. Again, let me just minimize so that I can have a cleaner, bigger screen. And I'm going to increase the font a little bit just so you can see this a little better. We'll make it smaller a little later. So what are we doing here? I'm saying it's a string. So both of these are going to be strings, kind of like that. And I'm also saying another thing. Watch, I'm going to do a comma, and I'll say I'm going to provide an array here. Normally, like if you do validation, you can do this. You can do validators. Okay, and this again, validators is from Angular forms. So I'm doing validators for validation, and I'm saying required like that. But in our case, we need to do more than one validation. If you do more than one validation in a field, if you do more than one validation in a field, what you need to do is to put an array and put all the validators into that, like that. Remember to do this, otherwise you get a lot of problems. So you do that, and you put commas. So I'm going to do another validator here. That's only if you're doing more than one validator. If you're doing just one, do whatever I just showed you. I'm going to do minimum length. Okay. Do minimum length 5 characters. And I'm going to do another validator of type email. So all I'm saying is that this username is going to be, in order to log in, you need to enter a username because it's required. It needs to be at least 5 characters long, and it needs to be an email. That's all I'm saying. And you'll see once we go to the form that it'll do the validation. Let's do several validations again here. Required. Again, minimum length 5 characters. And again, now we're going to do a maximum length of 20. This one is a little bit different. Than the first one. The first one has to be an email. That's the difference between these two. It has to be an email. And this one has to have maximum length of 20. Again, they both have minimum length of 5, and they're both required. That's all for the form. You type in the method name on login. I'm going to call it that. And I'm going to say constant username. I'm going to say this dot login form dot controls. This is how you, if you want to reference or get a handle to one of the forms Angular reactive forms field, that's how you do it. So all I'm saying is that go to the form and pick this particular username and tell me what it is right now, what the user typed in. That's all you're saying. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to make this password, same thing. So I'm defining two constants there. And for the future, in the future, we're going to go to the back end, actually in the next tutorial, and be able to put this stuff in here. But before we do that, all I'm going to do today is quite simplified way to do this. I'm just going to say if statement username and so if a user enters username and password as those two things that we just defined, user1.gmail.com, we're assuming that we have a user like that, and that's going to be in our database in the future. If that's the case, then do local storage set item. This item, again, I'm going to call it access token, and set that to, and I'm going to copy this. It's in the future you'll see that this is like, that's the way your variables, a variable called JWT, which is a JSON Web Token, it's going to look something like that. It's very long. The reason why it's set up like this is because if you're trying to hack the system, you need to use the correct username, password, and once you authenticate it in the back end, we check the database if you're there and that's the correct username and password. We issue you a temporary JWT token that expires in 10 minutes. So if a hacker wanted to, they can find this, but they have to find out what the password is from there, which is encrypted. And by the time they do that, in 10 minutes, this thing expires. So it's a very safe, industry standard way of securing web applications we're using today. So once we put that in to the local storage, which is the browser memory, and this, if you're using any modern browser, and I assume you're using Chrome or any other, IE or whatever it is, then the browser will know and it will have that. And then I'm going to say finally here that router navigate. I'm going to say actually navigate by URL so it refreshes the screen. I'm going to say go to a list user. So list user today is our protected page. You can have a lot of protected pages in the application, but today we are doing list user. That page that we just built is protected. So we're saying if the user is validated in the local storage or the browser memory, put in an access token, which is a JWT that you get to the backend. At the moment, we're just hard coding it, but in future, we'll get it from the backend. And then reroute to the protected page. If something happens while the user is logging in and they're not authenticated correctly, then I'm going to say, put a message in the error message. Not match. Like that. Put that message and display it on the sign-in form and prevent the user from going to the protected page. That's all I'm saying. So I want to say put the message in there, and the message is in there. Navigate. It's in the sign-in form, the login form, basically. This is wrong. You're supposed to do this. like that. So you do that, navigate back there. So that's it for our component. We just logging in if you have the correct username and password, and putting this in the JWT token in the browser memory and navigating to the protected page. If something happens, like the database is down, or you enter the wrong username, no password, or any of the variable errors, I'm just going to give you a message to redirect you to the sign-in page and tell you username and all password do not match. It's up to you to fix that and get going. So that's it. So let's go now to our page, sign-in component, finally, and write this page. So in here, again, it's saying sign in works. We're not going to do that. We're going to just delete that. And again, we're going to use a mat card, which we used in the other form. This time around, we have 3 subcomponents: mat, card, title, mat, card, content, mat, card, footer. Okay, and in the title, so every now and then it's good to go back to the browser and check sign in still works, and now you see it contains that mat card right there. So that's a good thing. And you see we still don't have any errors over here. If you have any errors, you need to fix them. So far so good. It's not always like this in development world, as you will know, but today we're a little bit lucky. So let's continue developing this. So again, now in the title, first of all, I'm going to align this to the center. Second, I'm going to put a div in here as usual. And this time around, I'm going to see ng class. So this is a trick in Angular where if you want to invoke a CSS class, if a condition is met, this is how you do it. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to say error. And error is basically, I'm going to copy this first. Let me just do this and then explain to you. So this is the error message right there that I want to display here in case that happens, kind of like that. And this right here is a CSS class right here. This is how to do it. So on error, all I'm going to do is pixel font, color red, but I'm going to use crimson. So it's going to just have display this error message right here, that we know that if you get a mess, and actually something I forgot here, I'm just going to say over here, this dot error message is no. So if you don't, if you log in successfully, I don't want any, but if you don't log in correctly, then I'm going to display this error message right here. That's all I'm saying. And I'm going to use this. It's going to be crimson, or basically red. That's all that is doing. As you can see, I'm trying to show you all the little tricks that I use. So I do that. And I'm going to say this, watch, ng if, again, if this. And what that means is that if there's a message, we know that there's only a message if you are not authenticated correctly. That's the only time we're displaying. And now we're going to use Angular interpolation to call that error message and display it over there. We're done with that. Now, two more things before we leave this page. First, I'm going to have a mat divider. And this is an Angular material component, so I'm going to come in here and say mat divider module. I'll go back in here, so we have a divider there, and then I'm just going to have a regular div class title header. We already have that in CSS. I'm just going to call this one right here. That's what I'm talking about right here. And I'm going to say login form. Oh, to say login. Create another thing here. I'm going to call int message. Again, this is our CSS class, and I'll say hint. Now, don't do this in production. I'm just hinting that that's, it's just user1 at gmail.com, and that's the password. Again, this is CSS class. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to say I used burly wood, very nice color. And I'm using different CSS. I'm going to have another tutorial. If you want me to make a tutorial on CSS, let me know. But we're using, the basic just to make the screen look good. I'll come back in here. So that's the hint that I'm talking about there. And I'm just telling you what that is. Which again, like I said, don't do that in production. Now let's go to the content. And inside here I'm going to do a form. Form group is equal to, we're going to use this form right here called login form. Okay, and then inside that form we're going to do another mat card to make it look good. Inside that mat card we're going to do mat card content only. Okay, and inside there we're going to do mat grid list with one column with a row height of 115 pixels, like that. Now, mat grid list is a Angular material component, so I'm going to come here and say mat grid list module. Make sure I do that, and so that's what I'm using. And then mat grid lists, you have to define the mat grid tiles. Again, you can go to the page that I showed you. Just go Google Angular Material Design and go to the components, and you'll see how to use these components right here. I'm just showing you what I do. So in this grid tile, I'm gonna do a div I call it login. Let's call it something better like fields container, something like that, you know. And then I need to do that CSS class right here. It's a little bit more complex. So this is how you do this one. I just want it to be 50%. A little padding. I'm going to say 100%. So that's all I'm going to say there. So in this container right here, I'm going to say mat form filled. And mat form filled, again, that's a Angular material component. So we need to come here and say import that module there. That's what this form filled right here is. So what I'm doing here is a prefix to display an icon in the field. It makes it look quite good, kind of professional. And so I'm going to say prefix, and I'm going to do account circle. Again, you can go to on Google Angular material icon and you'll see what that is. Account circle. And then I'm going to do input, mat input. Again, this is an Angular material component. And so you need to come over here and do mat input module. Like that. As you can see, every time you import Angular material design component, you need to go over there to that file and import it into that module and then export it to the other modules in your user application, like that. That's all you got to do. And that's why we like to use the Angular material design. Type is equals to text, form control name. And this is what you do when you reference your form controls. So we're going to pick this form control right here, username, and use it there. And placeholder is kind of like the label. So we're going to say username. I'll do this. because I know it's an email. And I'm going to say required. If you look at this form field right here, you'll see that we're saying again that it's required because it is required, and also because we want a red asterisk whenever the user does not populate it correctly. And I'll show you what that is in the form itself. You'll see it. And then I'm going to say math error ng if this error occurs only if in the login form controls username errors. If we do that so that if there's no errors, it doesn't crash with a null pointer exception. And I'm just going to say user name is required, like that. That's how you do the math errors. So like that. So let me expand this so that I can see everything. So I'm gonna do, so we know that we have 3 errors. The other one is minimum length. So for that, you type in minimum length, and now make sure it's not capitalized anywhere. It's all small. That's a very, it'll give you a lot of problems if you don't do it. I'll say here username must be at least 5 characters long. And then over here I'll say must be a valid email address, and I'll say email here. Okay, kind of like that. So that's how to do that. And now that we're done this form, let's just save it and go see if there's any errors in our browser. And right now it's refreshing. And you can see there's a form filled right there. So this is working here. And there's no errors here, so we're doing good so far. And this is the asterisk I was talking about. When you say required in the HTML, that's what you're trying to do. Of course, the logic is going to be there. So see, it's required. If I say user, you know, if I say user, it's going to say it must be at least 5 characters long. I'll say it must be a valid email address. So if I enter that, then the form is validated. So that's how to validate a field in Angular reactive forms. So let's just copy this now. Go back to the Visual Studio. Let's copy this, and we're going to build just another field like that. Kind of like that. But this time around, we're going to do this one as a password. And there's a few differences. So first of all, the icon here is going to be HTTPS. Okay. And second, this is not going to be username. The type is going to be a type of password. And it's going to be password. Again, this is a label. It's called a placeholder. Again, it's required. So over here, we're just going to say controls, password, minimum length, and again, here we're going to say maximum now. And we're going to say must be at least, at most 20 characters long. We're just going to say something like that. And we're done with the form fields. Now after that, over here, we're just going to do a little thing here. We're going to say again mat divider. Okay. And we're going to come to the footer, and in the footer we're just going to do align right, like we do with footers, and we're just going to have a button mat raised button color primary. Remember we used accent before. And now we're going to do this. Watch this. This is very important. Disabled. This is going to be disabled if this form right here, the login form. Again, this is a part of validation. If we're going to say if login form is invalid, we're going to have that button disabled. On clicking this button, we're going to go to this method right here and call that JavaScript method in our TypeScript file. And that's it. So we can go back here and let's just say actually there login. So that's what we're doing. So let's go now and look at our screen, and you can see it's refreshing, and now you have a username and a password. So this is a button like that. See, it looks like that. Something we did is wrong, so let's go back and fix that. What we did is button, and we didn't complete something here. So button is a mat raised button. Color is primary. It's disabled if that is that, and on login. So this is why we have that problem. Let's come over here and do inside here is where we're supposed to do login. So when you're programming, you make mistakes like those. So that's what we do there. Go back to the browser, and now it's compiling, and you can see the login button is there. Now it's disabled until the form is validated, and there's 6 validations if you recall. And I'm going to show you a little trick. Don't do this in production, but just for the sake of testing, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio and I'll show you this. So in Visual Studio, what I'm going to do over here, in the form itself, just for testing today, and you can remove this later, I'm going to say user1@gmail.com, and I'm going to say password. And what this is doing, watch, is it's just pre-populating the screen with the required fields, and you'll see that this button now is going to be enabled because we have the correct information. So now let's take a look in here. Local storage access token, and you can see it's still undefined. So if I try to so let's log in here. Once we log in here, again, let's do local storage access token, and now you see you have a token in there, a JWT token, this thing right here. So when you have that, you should be able to go to any page. So now that we've done this part, let's go to the third part of our tutorial and the last final part. Final part is just to now lock this page, because this page is a secured page. We want to secure this page. Why do we want to do that? Because right now I have an access token, but if I log out, I won't have the access token anymore, right? I don't have it, but I can still, if I know how to hack the system, I can do, if I know the page, I can go there. See, I shouldn't be able to do this if I don't have an access token. So that's a security violation. Very bad. This should not happen. So how do we prevent that from happening? Now let's go back to Visual Studio and complete our tutorial by, now I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to open this page that we created. Remember this? We created this. This is how to lock that page from hackers and unauthorized users. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to come here and I'm going to say a constructor, and I'm doing that just for one thing. I'm going to do private router from Angular router, if you recall, and I'm just going to do that. Okay, sometimes, like I said, this is not going to be imported, so you click on it, you do control period, it suggests something, and then you enter. So we just want to have a router here because we want to be able to route to the correct pages. As you can see, we use router a lot. So right now, the reason why that's what's happening, why we could go to that page, is because it just says return true no matter what. Okay, we're going to change this. Okay, here's what we're going to do instead of allowing everybody to come to that class. I'm going to say if local storage access token get item and the item is called, we called it access token. If that exists in the browser, what we're going to do is this. I'm going to say return true. Now we're going to say that if there's no access token, it means that the user is not logged in, so the person trying to access that page is hacking the page. What we do is, okay, we want you to go first and log in. And how do we do this? We're going to do this dot router dot navigate to the sign in page first. Okay, but while we're doing that, let's do this. We're going to do query params return URL state.url. And why are we doing this? Because if the person is coming from another page, so first using the state, we're going to know what page they're coming from. We're going to keep it in memory, and then we're going to reroute them to this sign in. So once they're successfully signed in, then we'll bring them back to the page that is in the state, and that's the reason why we do that. Okay, so that's it. So we need to go to this page right here now. Remember, we're doing routing, so it's coming to the correct route. So one last thing before the end of this tutorial, app routing we come to the routing now. And what we're going to do in the routing is this. We're going to lock this and this path. We're going to let this path go through, which is a sign-in, but these two, we're just going to do this, can activate. And to lock it, you just do this, can activate. And I'm going to pass it an array, and I'll say auth guard, like that, our auth guard. I'm going to do that for this. If the user doesn't type anything, I'm going to do that. Or if they try to go to the list user, which is a protected page, this page, I'm also going to lock it. So let's see what happens now. So we come back, and now I'm going to do F5. And now you see what happens. So now, if we try to go to that page again, if you look here, if I say local storage, there's no access token. So if I try to go to list user here, you'll see that it spins, and then it comes back in here to the sign-in page and tells me, oh, I'm going to return you to the list user URL once you're correctly logged in. And what is correct login? Again, the reason why it's doing that is because there's no access token. But if we can log in successfully, now we have the access token, we can go there. And when you have this, you can go to any page you want in the application, because that's the only page that's protected. You can go to this page. You can also come back to the page that you want to go to. Why? Because you have a JWT token called an access token, which is this thing right here. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of our tutorial. So we were able to do Angular JWT authentication. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial. And before we go, I'd like to ask you a question. Is there any topics of what you saw today, any topic you want me to explain a little bit more? Please let me know in the comments section below so that I can build a tutorial for that. Otherwise, if you have any questions or any comments, please let me know in the comments section, including, if you like the tutorial. Let me know the parts you like or the parts that you don't like. I expect criticisms too. So, thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and goodbye.